Hello folks, welcome back and hope you're doing good. So let's have a look at the statements in JavaScript, and in our previous video we did discuss about output methods in JavaScript. So let's go into our VS Code and look at that statements. So we are right now in our VS Code, and the method that I'll be using and I prefer for output is console.log, because this is the better one. You can see the warnings and errors as well in the console. So yeah, it is a good method to use while you're learning. So okay, so there are some methods that we can use to declare variables in JavaScript, which are let, var, and const. So all these keywords can be used to declare variables in JavaScript. So let's say we want to declare a variable x, we want to declare a variable y, and we want to declare a variable z. So that's how actually we declare variables. Okay, so this is an error, let's discuss about it but later. So we have declared 3 variables right now in our JavaScript, and JavaScript is a loosely typed language, which means that it's some shifting of syntax here and there is possible, so that if I forgot to add the semicolon, this will execute anyway and it will not give me syntax error. Okay, so this is a const statement, and the error that it is giving us right now is it says that it must be initialized. That means, what is initialization of a variable? That means I don't leave it undefined and I assign it at least some value. So yes, our error is vanished. So you need to assign some value, and in JavaScript you don't have like data, you do have data types, but you don't really define it using int and all those things. You can use these 3 keywords to define almost anything. So you can store a string, you can store a number, or maybe let's say you can store an array. So you can write down an array 0 1 2, or maybe you can store an array of strings. So yeah, you can also do that. So what is actually the difference between these two? So let and var do have a little bit of difference. We'll discuss that in Google search. And const is basically a keyword that defines a constant value of a variable. That means if I write down z is equals to 5, that nowhere in my program I can say that z is equals to 10, z is equals to some string hello. The value of z will be constant throughout my program, so I cannot use it if I have declared it globally, or if I have declared inside it in some function, then I can also use that variable in some other function, because the scope of that variable would be limited. We'll be discussing that. So what is actually the difference between let and var? So let's do a simple Google search. So yes, this is the basic difference. So let is block scoped. So what does it mean? So if we are executing a code block and let is defined there, so it will be defined in that whole block. For example, if we define a let inside a function, that it will also be valid outside a function where the code is to be executed. Whereas var is function scoped, it will only be defined under the function only if you define it inside a function. Let does not allow you to redeclare variables. For example, if we have declared this let x equals to 5, so of course yes, you can change the value of x, but you cannot write it down again, let x is equals to 6. You cannot do that. This is an error. We can see that cannot redeclare block scope variable. So yes, this is not really possible. And var does allow you to redeclare variables. Instead of let, you can use var to declare x is equals to 6. So hoisting in JavaScript is a different concept. We'll discuss that later. So this is actually, yes, that's pretty much it. And let's look at that. We have defined x, let x is equals to y plus z, and we haven't defined y and z yet. So let's define const y equals to 5, x equals to 6. So I have defined these 2 variables. Okay, I have already defined x, my bad. So let's output it, console dot log, and I want to print the value of x for now, so the answer should be 11. And let's look at our console if the answer is alright. So this is our console, and yes, it is giving the output as 11, much expected. So these are the statements in JavaScript, and you can search. Okay, so there is one more thing that we cannot do, let. So you can keep variable names almost you want if you want anything, but there are few constraints. For example, you cannot use variables to use it as a keyword. For example, there is a keyword called new in JavaScript, and you cannot declare a variable called new because it is already a keyword. And also you cannot start your variable name from underscore, I think so, yeah. Also, if we are learning to define things, let's learn to define a function also. So there is a method to define a function. So function is a block of code that can be executed while you want to be executed. So let's look at that. So there is a keyword called function which can be used to define function of any name. So let's call a function as any name. So this is the optimal method of defining a function, keeping the first very letter name small, and when you change the word, keep the first letter of that word capital. So I have used any name just like that, and this is the definition of a function. And you can write down any block of code that you want to be executed with that function. For example, if I call that function anywhere, if I call that function here, the code inside the function will be executed, and if I don't call that function, that won't be executed. So let's look at that. Console dot log, and let's say this is a function. So let's look at our console, and yes, it does say that this is a function. And if we don't call that function, so yes, it won't be executed. So this is how actually functions work. There is one more method of function that we used to define in ES6, but we'll be discussing that later. For now, this is the way that we declare function in JavaScript. Thank you so much, and see you in the next video.